Welcome to American Medieval, a podcast about the fact that if the United States has never been truly modern, it's probably because we've always been a little bit medieval. I'm your host, Professor Matthew Gabriel, and I've been researching, teaching, and talking about the Middle Ages, well, to anyone who will listen at least, for more than 3 decades. Each week on the show, we'll be joined by an expert scholar who will share their fascination with, and sometimes their revulsion by, both the medieval world itself as well as the ways the historical period has been remembered and used right here in the USA. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of American Medieval. I am Professor Matthew Gabriel, and I am excited to be joined today by Dr. Sonja Drimmer, who is an associate professor of medieval art in the Department of History of Art and Architecture at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. That's a lot of words together. But she's also an incredibly impressive scholar and just a wonderful person all around. She has a new book coming out very soon called Impressive Politics: Print Before the Press in Late Medieval England, and I want to talk a little bit about that. She's also been the author of some really great pieces about resistance to or frictions to AI in the university setting or in just kind of teaching generally. But we'll get to that soon. Before we do that, welcome, Sonja.
I am so delighted to be here. I am now an avid listener, so it's great to join the ranks of all the very cool people who have preceded me.
Long-time listener, first-time guest. I guess
Exactly.
Yes, okay. So hopefully there will be many more. So now that this thing's actually... It is always weird, I have to say, like, when I decided to do this podcast and, with great help from the people at Multitude, who's the podcast collective I work with, I guess I assumed that people would listen to it, but people actually do listen to it. So that is strange to me, but here we are.
It's the strangest thing about social media as well, when people who don't post, who are not heavily online, then tell me about something that they saw that I posted, and I thought, oh, I'm posting to, 5 people, and then it turns out actually everyone can see it. So
yes, there's always those people who read them, and that's really kind of wonderful. It's always a little bit scary. I will say the first thing I will always get, and you and I have actually met, so you know this already, is that the first thing I always get when people meet me in person is, wow, you're a lot taller than I thought you were.
I think I was one of the people who said that to you.
I think you were, actually. Yes. I don't know. I mean, I think people just kind of imagine me as a short, angry man, but I'm a very tall kind of angry man.
You're a tall, angry man. Yeah.
Exactly. So anyway, before we get going, as you know, as again, a longtime listener, we like to start off with kind of a silly question about time machines. And so I will jump right to that. So we have the time machine. It's a one-time use time machine in our kind of imaginative kind of situation here. We have presented the time machine to you, Sonja. We have to go back to a childhood Sonja and tell her that she will grow up someday to be a medieval art historian. How does young Sonja react to that news?
So as I said, I've been listening, and I tried to prepare for this question because I'm an academic, so I did my homework.
We do our research.
I did of course, naturally, right? So it was really interesting because I was thinking about, well, okay, which Sonja are we talking about here?
Great.
And to my mind, I have a few different professional identities. So I was thinking, well, how would I respond if Professor Matthew Gabriel said, how would I respond if you just said medievalist?
Okay.
As opposed to medieval art historian.
Okay.
So if we went back to teenage me,
right,
I would be disappointed that I was not a famous stand-up comedian.
Oh, okay. All right.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So there was a period in my teens when I went, if not every weekend, pretty regularly to this place called Stands Up New York on 78th and Broadway with my friends to learn the craft because I was convinced that that's what I was going to do.
Okay.
Yeah. So that would have been disappointing, but in preparing for this show, my brother was in town visiting, and I said, if we had gone back in time and someone said to you, to my brother Abe, your older sister would grow up to be a medievalist, what would you say to that? And he said, one of my earliest memories of you is in your bedroom. I guess I must have been in high school. And this big oak tag that was posted up on the wall of my bedroom.
Okay.
With dates and names and this huge this elaborate study guide that I'd made.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, I knew you were a nerd. So not surprised at all. But the art history component is very explainable.
Okay.
That part is super explainable. When I was a kid, my dad he sat me down with all of his LPs and started showing me the LP covers, like Sgt. Pepper. And I have no interest. And I'm sorry to listeners, I hate the Beatles. I don't like their music.
Thank you. Thank you. At least there's two of us.
Oh,
So,
excellent.
yes.
Yeah, great. So
I'm going to lose so many listeners for this.
100% you are.
Yeah.
Although I'd be curious to find out what the fans of the Beatles are like.
Yeah.
So he sat me down and he started walking me through the cover, the sleeve of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Band, Lonely Heart Club Band. Sorry, everyone. And pointing out, I don't know, do you know anything about this cover and the whole Paul is dead conspiracy?
I can picture it. Yes. So,
So there was this whole conspiracy cooked up by God knows who. I mean, people must have been soaked in marijuana. Must have been weed-soaked conspiracy in which the cover had a series of clues about the death of Paul and that maybe he was being impersonated.
right.
Oh, yeah. So there's this one image in which Paul is the only Beatle standing with his back to the camera. Someone has a patch on their coat that says DOA, like dead on arrival. And that was just one of the album covers that my dad was showing me. And so for me, this idea that art could be looked at closely and then thought about deeply and interpreted in the same way that I was learning about texts, because I really loved the close reading I was learning in school.
Sure.
That immediately captured my imagination. But the medieval component, I do not like fantasy. I hated Tolkien so much that when we were required to read...
You're trying to ruin my show, aren't you?
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I hated Tolkien so much that when we were required to read The Hobbit in 5th grade, I nearly protested. But going back to the earlier comment, I was a nerd, so I did it. I had to do it.
Of course.
So that was a real surprise element until my senior year of high school when I took my first art history class. And for winter break that year, our teacher took us on a field trip to St. John the Divine, which is like near Columbia University.
Sure. Yeah.
And that was my first encounter with Gothic, albeit American
Of
neo-Gothic
course.
architecture. And it was during Christmas time. And so it was festooned with everything. And I was so taken by that by the time I was finished with my freshman year of college, not only did I know I was going to be an art history major, but my dorm mate looked at my transcript and said, you're halfway done with the medieval cultures major.
So, yeah, amazing how transformative a class can be, and a teacher, right? Like an instructor can be in just kind of shaping the way that happened. As I've said in kind of other episodes and in other contexts, like I became a medievalist because I didn't know what I wanted to be. I took a course. I love the professor. I just wanted to take more courses with him. And by the end of it, it was kind of similar. It's just like, oh, wow, I know a lot about the Middle Ages now.
Can I ask, what course was it? Do you remember what the subject was?
Sure. It was just Introduction to Medieval History in the history department.
Yeah.
I started as an anthropology major.
Oh.
When I went to the University of Delaware, go Blue Hens. And I decided after a semester that wasn't for me. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I had no idea what I thought it was going to be, but it wasn't that. I took some gen ed courses, and one of them, probably because it fit in my schedule, was medieval history. And then it was just like, oh wow, this is really neat. This is really cool. And the professor was great. Yeah, and then I just ended up knowing a whole lot about it. But it was just like that chance kind of encounter because that course was offered at that time in that semester at that place, and just kind of away from there. And you like having that experience of going to the St. John to the Divine, like being able to experience that at that moment, right? It's transformative sometimes.
That's definitely the word. And I also recall that one of the things that we learned about in my art history class was Ravenna and Galla Placidia. So for our listeners who don't know, I'm looking at the cover of your book, The Bright Ages, right now, and the opening pages have to do with Galla Placidia. So if listeners aren't familiar with it, it's a 5th century structure in Italy, in a city that preserves a bunch of 5th and 6th century structures. And the mosaic program is intact, and it is glittering, sparkling. If you're a magpie like I am and you like shiny, shiny, then that's the place for
Yeah.
you. And I was so taken with it that it became a goal of mine to go see it. And I finally made it there. And I believe it was 2018.
Okay. And it's everything, isn't it? Like it lives up to the hype.
So completely. And I was so fortunate because I traveled there. My husband and I traveled there off season. And I went as soon as it opened in the morning. And I had Gala Placidia to myself for an hour.
Yeah.
And it's this tiny building too.
It's a tiny building, yeah.
Mhm.
And Ravenna is a really cute little city nowadays. And we were kind of the same. Like I visited, I think 2002, 2003, something like that. We happened to be living in London, so I took a trip to Italy. But it was off season as well. And so even in kind of the gloom of like early winter, like it just sparkled. Like it was so bright in there. It was just absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll get a kickback from the Ravenna Tourist Board, so hopefully. Before we move on, though, I do want to ask one more question about kind of the journey that you kind of laid out for us. Like, well, actually, two questions. Is one is like, would there be a different answer if I asked medievalist versus art historian? And then what's the kind of difference? Because I think like your work, like I think many of us, like crosses a lot of disciplinary boundaries. And so like, although we're kind of tethered to departments and stuff like that, like I think a lot of us, the way that we conceive of our work isn't necessarily tied to one discipline. The second, but maybe more important one is, in your improv career, did you ever perform?
So, okay.
Not improv, sorry, stand-up comedy.
Yeah. So I'll take the last question first because that's first on my mind. So, right, it wasn't improv.
No.
I tried out in college for improv. So at Brown, which is in Providence, Rhode Island, there's a group called Improvidence. And I did not make the cut, but I made the cut for Out of Bounds, which was the sketch comedy group.
Oh, okay.
And I love mentioning this. I'm going to embarrass myself a little bit, but I have to tell people this. I have to say it publicly. I was in a sketch comedy group with the actor who he was famous. I think he's still famous now, John Krasinski.
Yes, he's extremely famous.
Okay. Well, so I've kind of avoided seeing stuff with him because it was weird.
Yeah.
But we were in a sketch comedy group together.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
John Krasinski.
I'm
Okay.
imagining, I have to tell you, I am imagining people I know listening to this. Because you're not the first person I've told this to. So, right? Because when you have this brush with fame, you like to tell people, right? Yeah.
Well, okay, that's fantastic. So maybe we'll have a comedy themed episode, and we'll get back to that at some point, and we'll learn more about that.
Yeah, that was my real community when I was in college.
Yeah.
There are some people now who I know professionally, acquaintances, friends. Turns out we overlapped as art history majors in college, and I don't remember them, but I remember my comedy group.
The sketch comedy group, right?
The
yeah,
sketch comedy
exactly.
I loved, yeah.
That's fantastic. John Krasinski. Yes, he's still kind of famous. So
Okay,
I have to say.
That's how you know that I've opted post age 40. I have opted to be out of the loop in terms of like I'm okay with not being up on things.
No, I think that's totally fair. Like even as much as I try to be, like I'm not. Like all my jokes in my classroom like don't land because my pop culture references are so out of date to my students. So
it's wild.
It's a plague. Yeah.
It's wild. So when I started teaching in 2013, I always ended my classes with the latest meme that had something to do with what I was teaching that day. I've given up. I don't do that anymore.
The good thing is, though, is that I'm so old now, and I'm older than you are, is that the memes that I know, or the pop culture references, they're starting to come back around because like the 90s are kind of hip again. And so students are knowing a little bit more about them. So it's just like, oh man, like I experienced that the first time, around when I was 18, 19. So. But back to the Middle Ages for a moment here is the question of interdisciplinary. I sit in a religion department right now. I'm been trained as a historian. The work kind of takes you, or research and teaching kind of takes you in lots of different directions, engages with lots of things. Like, how do you feel that your own work, like, do you see yourself kind of squarely situated as an art historian or as kind of a medievalist kind of more generally?
This is such a good question. And I think about this a lot because, and someone can check me on this, but much as the term interdisciplinary has been applied to me and my work, my first book was called The Art of Allusion, Illuminators in the Making of English Literature. And so it straddles the fields of literary history, manuscript studies, and art history. But I don't think I've ever called myself an interdisciplinary scholar.
Okay.
In part because I think disciplines are really important. I think being able to move across them is.
Sure.
Very much so. However, the questions that I ask of things originates both from my own discipline, the sorts of questions that we ask as art historians, and
Hmm.
possibly even more importantly, from an awareness of how those questions came about. So
Mm.
one thing that we might talk about, there are many different stories to the history of art history. When it began, you can take it back all the way 2,000 years to Pliny, who in book 35, 33 of his natural history talks lots about art stuff. And all my fellow art historians will know this story of Pliny, and people in other disciplines won't.
Yeah.
But as far as academic art history is concerned, that's 1870s Germany.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right. And so there are a certain set of questions that we ask with the awareness of the origins of those questions in a very particular time and place and political context.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's always been really, really important, while also being exposed to other fields in the awareness that I don't know their disciplinary stories.
Sure. One of the episodes that I've recorded recently, and it'll be out by the time that this episode airs, I was talking with Rachel Shine,
Ah,
who's an Islamicist, and really wonderful, and she had a very similar kind of take on this as well. Is that because her work like isn't neatly classified in a lot of ways, and I think like a lot of us sometimes, is that people outside don't know necessarily how to do it. But she was exactly right. It's like asking questions and understanding the historiography or the scholarship behind it and why you're asking the questions that you're asking is really important. And it can lead to, when you're not aware of that, some really kind of problematic scholarship, like people treading in areas that they just don't understand and kind of making a big mess about the sources and the people in the past, really not doing justice to the people they're trying to study.
absolutely. And I think that one of the things that comes to mind a lot is that there's this fear of being a gatekeeper. So I don't really
Hmm.
think about it as gatekeeping. I think about it as respect for the ongoing conversation that scholars have been having in my field for about 150 years. If we want to think about the sort of institutional formation of art history in the university.
Sure.
So for me, that's not gatekeeping. That's saying, hey, let's respect that so many people have been talking about this for a long time. Let's listen to them first.
Yeah, I mean, if you were writing, I don't know, like an article on the Crusades or something like that, and you didn't know a certain set of primary sources and you were trying to make a point, like you're going to get yourself in trouble. In the same way, like if you don't know kind of how questions have been framed and answered within a certain disciplinary perspective, like you're going to get people can learn that, like scholars or even people outside of the academy, they can learn that, but you got to do the work, right? Like we were talking earlier, like doing your research, right? Like you just got to do your research. And one of the things that you can do is ask your colleagues in those other disciplines, right? And not necessarily try to do it on your own, but work collaboratively in groups, and like that sometimes can lead to very productive conversations.
Preach.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've written a couple books with a good friend and colleague, so I'm a big fan of collaboration. So
Likewise.
likewise, indeed. So let's talk about print in the Middle Ages, because I have been reliably assured that there was no such thing as printing in the Middle Ages, and yet you dare to come on here on my show and say that you have actually disproven this. So what can you tell us about print in the Middle Ages?
Well, I mean, I think one of the starting points is to say that the decision that print equals something done with a press, with
Okay.
a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
support like paper,
Mm-hmm.
words or images that we then use ink to, squeeze onto that support.
Mm-hmm.
That's just one definition of print. So if we are to have a maximalist definition of it, well, print is contiguous with the entire history of humanity from the moment we dipped our hands in paint and pressed them onto cave walls.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that humans might be staring slack-jawed at the, ingenuity of this invention,
Yeah.
that's hyperbole and it's a bit silly. But to speak about the Middle Ages, one of the things that I think about a lot in this book was, for one, just the language. We can talk a little bit more about what are people printing.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that struck me as I was doing research on this book, which really started out of an interest in the political culture of Wars of the Roses England, 15th century England,
Okay.
was that the word print, and we're talking Middle English here, so it'll be print or praint but any sort of version of print, gets used a lot in
Mm.
poetry and political poems, polemic, treatises. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to put a pin in that. So I was reading my primary sources, as you do, right?
Mhm.
One of the things that happens in this period in the 15th century in England is that we get this explosion of vernacular, so English, not Latin chronicles about England and coming out of London in particular, but elsewhere. And this word comes up quite a bit. So I thought, okay, well, how are they thinking about print?
Mhm.
And what are they calling print? And one of the things that gets called print is money.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they had printed money in the Middle Ages. It was just metallic.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh. And so that's one of those things that started my journey on this project because money, as always, it's very touchy in this period as then as now. Let's think about cryptocurrency. Let's think about
Mhm.
all the new coins that Trump is not issuing and issuing. So, that, right.
Yeah.
Coins attract a lot of political discussion in this period because there's what's called a bullion famine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, all the silver mines dry up in Eastern Europe. And so there's
Mhm.
like a scarcity of coinage of silver money.
Yeah.
And the exchange rate for gold is higher on the continent. So people are holding back their gold coin and not putting it into circulation until merchants can get over to Italy and get more silver for it.
Yeah.
And anyway, so there's this problem with money. And at the same time, there is a king that's just been deposed, Richard II. Henry IV, a new king who deposed him, comes on the scene and he's dealing with this monetary crisis. He has to figure out how to deal with that. And he does a number of things to manipulate the coinage. He doesn't debase it.
Okay.
Yeah, he just decides that the face value is going to stay the same, but the coins are going to be a little bit lighter.
Ah, a little
Uh-huh.
less silver. Yeah.
Less silver, less gold in the coins, right? So that's drawing people's attention to the fact that money is more than just this commodity that they have, gold and silver. It is also an abstraction. And
Mhm.
so one of the things that they start to do to polemicize against the king is talk about how, and this happens more later with Henry VI, a later king who's also confronting the same crisis. He's not manly enough or strong enough to keep the print of his face on the coin.
Well, okay.
Right? And
Yeah,
so this
yeah.
brings up a whole bunch of issues about, okay, well, why would men be associated with making a lasting print?
Mhm.
Why are they using that sort of language to describe the king's weakness? So money becomes this vehicle for political discourse then, as now, right?
Yeah.
When you want to argue that the government isn't as reliable as it should be, well, cryptocurrency starts to look pretty good.
Mhm.
So that's one of the ways in which print comes up as more than just an object, it's also an idea.
Yeah, but it's also the material object, as you said, right? Like it's the physical kind of impression of, as you were saying, kind of at the very beginning, like pressing down onto a pliable surface and creating something that has value and then changing the shape and how that kind of works. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that some of your work is also related to, which is similar to coins, right? Is about seals.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, because I mean, that's another practice, not just in kind of late medieval England, but like all the way back into the early Middle Ages, into the 7th and 8th and 9th centuries and stuff like that, right? So there's lots of these activities that are happening, which are, again, like a seal is not just kind of a piece of wax, like it's doing work. It's an intellectual thing as well as a physical object, as you were saying, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I couldn't have written this book without the monumental scholarship of this scholar named Brigitte Bedos-Rezac, who has
Mm-hmm.
written about the importance of the seal, particularly in the 12th century, as it started to become a way of thinking about social relationships and trust, right? So if you want to create a document, you have a seal matrix, that's the metal part created, and you say, I was here, and you leave what we call an index of your presence in that wax. The fact that you put the seal into the wax. And in that period, that idea of a trace or your presence being on the document was part of its factor of authentication. We might think of two-factor authentication
Yeah.
now. Well, the seal was part of that, right? And so there's this discourse in this period. So, this discourse, a language, a set of ideas that attach to the idea of print. And part of the argument that I make in my book is that perennially throughout the history of humanity, not always, but print has been a way, it's been an idea, a way of thinking about social relationships, particularly relationships of trust. because of this idea of presence that's left by a print, but they're not the same.
Hmm.
And that's the most important thing to me about, what it means to be a historian. It's recognizing that while there may be some literal things like print technologies that may be universal or ubiquitous, it means something different in every culture and society. And my job as a historian or an art historian is to look at the particularities of that and not to say that print is just one thing. It meant something very different in the late 14th and 15th centuries from what it meant in the 12th century.
Yeah. And I mean, context absolutely matters. I mean, we tend to, well, I mean, not we like as medievalists necessarily, but I think outside observers tend to flatten the Middle Ages, right? And say like, but we're talking about more than 1,000 years, oftentimes across several continents, and even within those continents, lots of different areas. And so things totally change. And kind of related to that, I wanted to ask you too, because I think, again, like the thing that we're confronting when we're talking about print, oftentimes is we're thinking about that big machine. Right. Like we're thinking about Gutenberg and the press and books, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So how does kind of that factor into the analysis? Not just like how does that relate to some of the things that you were talking about kind of with money, with it being an intellectual idea, form of social relations and stuff like that, but also confronting like that assumption that even sometimes, like oftentimes medievalists we carry with us when we're talking about this kind of fraught or loaded, maybe is a better term, word that we're using here.
Yeah, I mean, the word that comes up, to my mind is the idea of essentialism, right? Print
Okay.
essentialism. That when we talk about print, what we're really talking about, what really matters is print as a medium for mass communication. So we're thinking books. And it has to have been made on this hulking apparatus, this press. But I just ask why, right? So they weren't thinking in the 15th century that, it would be really great if print represented a way of making books. And that's what real print is. And we're just inching our way along towards that. That's just not how the way that history works. So I guess the question is, well, then why are we deciding that that's the one that matters, that that's the print mechanism that is the most important one? And once we say that, what we're really pointing to is not a technology. We're pointing to a whole constellation of historical factors that rule out the idea that it's this one machine sitting in a room in Mainz that makes history. And I love this thing I'm about to tell you about because most medievalists I talk to don't even know about it. Did you know that there exists a 13th century? So I'll start by saying for listeners, Gutenberg's press is from circa 1450, but there's a printing press that exists now from 13th century Canterbury, 1232 is about the date. Did you know this?
No, I did not know this.
It's a seal press. It looks very much like a printing press, and it was used to print or impress the Great Seal of Canterbury.
Really?
The Cathedral of Canterbury.
Yeah.
It's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And a similar one is believed to have been used at Westminster, but it doesn't survive anymore for the king's bureaucracy used for sealing the Great Seal onto all documents, sometimes upwards of 100 of which could go out per day.
Sure. In both 13th century, as far as we know?
1232 for the Canterbury one that survives, or circa 1232, because that's the year that they had a new Great Seal engraved. And this one fits the dimensions of that.
Oh, okay.
Like the
All right.
actual place
Yeah.
where you put the seal matrix. Yeah.
That's where it would go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had no idea. Like I am learning so much. And it's not, but I think again, like you were saying, like we get so wrapped up as scholars kind of looking backwards, knowing kind of the end goal and how, the Gutenberg press or printing press for books and pamphlets, like really does kind of change information dissemination and assuming that everybody's kind of moving towards that. But the idea that they have created it, some version of it, and maybe there were others or something like that, like for the impression of seals shows you what's important in that particular place and in that particular time. And that's what you were saying kind of at the very beginning is like you start with the sources, right? What are the sources saying? What is important to them? And then it gets you out of a lot of sometimes these kind of intellectual dead ends or thinking about it kind of everything kind of teleologically in which necessarily we're heading towards this. And that's not really true, is it?
It's not really true. And I don't think it's fair to the individuals and communities that we are researching to say that we're going to look at your processes, at your technologies, at your discourses for thinking about these processes and technologies and only see them as stages en route to where we are now.
Mhm.
That's bad history.
Yeah.
That
Yep.
that and so often, one of the things, so this book emerged out of my thinking with my primary sources, thinking the thoughts that I had while I was reading and looking at these various objects. So my book deals with coins, seals, as you say, and particularly
Mhm.
signet rings.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Livery badges, which were a form of mass-produced badge that bore the emblem of a particular lord that was
Okay.
distributed to their followers. And then finally, I think about heraldry, and that's more in conceptual terms. It was conceptualized according to print paradigms,
Mhm.
which that's a whole other can of worms. But anyway, so my book emerged out of thinking about all of those primary sources and how they were being called print. So why shouldn't I respect my medieval people calling them print?
Yeah.
And then, of course, I'm trying to be a good scholar. I'm reading secondary sources. And what I'm noticing is that a lot of scholars who work on print and woodcut prints in art
Mhm.
history will do this really nice do deference and do a little genuflection and say, yeah. Throughout the Middle Ages, we have objects that are like print. We've got seals. We've got Eucharistic hosts, which are pressed like
Sure. Yeah.
waffles,
Mhm.
all of that. But that's not really what we're talking about now. Like that was there, but it's really the printing press that matters.
Yeah.
And, my book just asked why.
Yeah. Why do we have to accept that paradigm, right? And this goes back to something we were talking about with interdisciplinarity as well. Is like, in order to ask the why, you have to understand those questions, right? And like kind of the long history of how they've been framed and what kind of led to them and stuff like that. And then it allows you to do all sorts of kind of interesting stuff beyond that. And it requires a lot of work, and understanding kind of that history, but it can lead you down some really interesting, I don't want to say rabbit holes because this is a bigger thing than that, but some interesting kind of research avenues.
Big rabbit hole.
Big rabbit hole. So like a warren, right?
A
Like,
warren.
a warren, like, and maybe that's an apt metaphor because like a rabbit hole is not just like a hole in the ground. Like it goes into I've read Watership Down. So I know all about rabbit holes and warrens and things like that. So
Speaking of being an art historian, I can remember vividly the cover of my paperback copy of Watership Down that my mother gave me, but I never read it.
no. Okay. Okay. It is. I remember that for not great reasons because it was a little bit traumatizing. So yeah, sorry, literature digression there. Actually, just Matt's childhood drama making itself known on the podcast because what else is a podcast for but for sharing childhood trauma? But anyway,
100%.
100%. This is where we are. Spirits is a history and comedy podcast focused on folklore, mythology, and the occult, told through the lens of feminism, queerness, and modern adulthood. Julie and Amanda get together each week to learn more about a different story from mythology and folklore over drinks. Get it? Spirits? Anyway, that's everything from the mythological origins of major franchises like Lord of the Rings, Wonder Woman, to modern urban legends, to a roundup of werewolf stories from around the world. They've been doing this for 9 years and are still going strong. Head to spiritspodcast.com or search for Spirits wherever you download your podcasts. New episodes every Wednesday. What were you talking about? Print. That's what we were talking about. Print in the Middle Ages. And then, yes, that's right. Rabbit holes, warrens, Watership Down. Got it. I'm back on track now. The way that you're describing it, I mean, it seems like kind of your work with these objects and again, kind of listening to the primary sources and thinking about the important context of, the particular moment in England. It all kind of came together in this research project. But I'm wondering too, like, were there any assumptions that you found yourself making about kind of what you were finding or what you were looking at that you had to check yourself? And I asked that too because like in my own research, like one of my most recent academic book, which is about biblical commentaries in the 11th and mostly in the 10th and 11th century, a little bit in the 12th century, is that I was assuming based upon some scholarship, but upon, my own reading of the sources, that there wasn't a lot there to find. And then all of a sudden there was, and I realized I was looking in the wrong places. So it wasn't even necessarily about kind of the scholarship, but it was more about kind of widening my understanding, kind of similar to what we were talking about your definition of print. But like, it was me who was stopping myself from seeing the evidence that was there.
Mm. I mean, my most concrete example of having that dramatic a realization is actually for my first book. So, I mean, there were certainly moments about, when I was doing this print book, but I had a real breakthrough because one of those moments. So, and it came out of a crisis. So,
as the best breakthroughs do.
Right?
Yeah.
So the crisis was that someone had given me money and I found nothing to do with it because, well, I'll tell the story.
Okay. All right.
So one of the things that I do in my first book is I look into the commercial conditions of manuscript production, and particularly literary manuscript production in 15th century England. So starting around 1400, we get this explosion of Middle English manuscript production centered in the metropolis in London. And there's this scholar, his name is C. Paul Christensen, and around 1990, I think it came out, he created what was the equivalent of, which one's the business directory, the white pages or the yellow?
White pages.
The white pages, right? He created the equivalent. It's called a dictionary of scribes, illuminators, and
I want to pause and say I was wrong. It's the yellow pages. The white pages was the people. Yes. And this is, I'm sure most of our listeners aren't going to be like, what the hell are they talking about? There used to be a book in which there were phone numbers. That's basically what we're referring to. Sorry.
Yeah.
Please.
Don't worry. There'll be collector's items next year and
sure
the youth will be pouring over them.
Yeah.
So he created what was the equivalent of a yellow pages of named scribes, illuminators, and bookbinders that he could find in the records. And I said, I applied for a grant, as you do, to the Bibliographical Society of America. And I said, I'm going to pick up where Christensen left off, and I'm going to find more names. And specifically, I'm going to find the names of those who were, because I had some hints, I had done some scoping work. And I said, specifically, I'm going to find the names of those who were working on literary manuscripts.
Okay.
So I get myself to London and I'm doing this work, and he got them. He got the names, right? And this is a really intensive period of archival study. I remember this so vividly. I came to this sad basement sublet that I had every day. I poured myself a huge glass of white wine. I turned on one of the few channels that was on the TV in that flat to the Food Network.
Oh, okay.
I created a dummy Twitter account. Twitter was okay at the time, called Drunk Food Network. And I tweeted my way through Barefoot Contessa just to sort of let off steam. So I went back to the drawing board and I said to myself, okay, well, what am I finding?
Yeah.
And I found a ton of records, financial records of manuscript production, but they didn't name the people they were commissioning to do the work. And then I started expanding my sources. I said, well, this can probably tell us something about the commercial relationships between people and organizations who are making books. And let me see what I can learn. So I expanded my purview beyond the sources that you would think, which would be like rental records in the area where scribes were working. I looked at every single surviving parish record from 15th century London. I found a ton of records about manuscript production, but they didn't name names for the most part, which led to a really important point in my book, which was they didn't care about the individual that much.
Yeah.
And this, relates to a point I make in that book about the earliest illustrated manuscripts of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, where there are very few author portraits, and the ones that do are real weird ones that don't celebrate Chaucer's authority like we would assume would be celebrated.
Yeah.
Because they weren't that interested.
Yeah.
So that's one way in which a crisis led me to a breakthrough and caused me to rethink some of my priors. But yeah, I'm sure that happened along the way in this print book. I'm currently now doing the revisions before it goes to copy edit. So I'm in the thick of it. I think I'm not necessarily in that place of reflection.
No, there's always that moment, right, with large projects in which you're so deep in it, it's very difficult to kind of pull back and see or reflect on it in any ways. Like you need a little bit of distance. So there's always a moment for me too with these large projects with all the books and stuff like that, is which there's a point at which I hate it, then I like it again. I understand, and at least like I've done this enough, like I realize it. Like I had total existential crisis with my first book, like before tenure and stuff like that, in which I hated my project and I just didn't want to do it, and I was just like, I'm a fraud. I'm going to quit my job. I'm never going to get tenure and stuff like that. But then I realized, like, oh no, some of this is actually pretty good. And then work through it. So it's usually for me with the copy edits, because that's just not my strength, is that kind of very close reading and going through every word of mine and stuff like that. I am not a person who loves my darlings. I'm more than happy to kill all of my darlings. They should all be dead. That's one of the benefits of writing with a partner sometimes. So
Oh, I love doing that, because then they'll let you know when what you're doing, when you're really onto something,
mhm.
and it helps to squash that self-doubt. Yeah, I developed this really weird neurosis for my first book when I was doing the copy edits, that I had not actually consulted all the secondary scholarship that I was citing. And I even like drove back to my office to get a book off the shelf to make sure that it was fully annotated in my hand, because I was like,
Yeah.
I can't possibly have read it that deeply. And
Yeah.
yes, I did.
There have been moments where I have decided, like, oh, that looks like a really interesting book. And then I get it from the library, and then I look on my shelf, and like, there it is on my shelf. And I open
Yeah.
it up, notes all over it and stuff like that. And it's just like,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I think actually, now that we're talking about it in these terms, to your question about having
Mm.
to change your mind, I have made myself doubt my narrative several times by, thinking, oh, the idea of the print revolution and the determinacy of the printing press as the only real kind of print. I've
Mm.
said to myself, no one really believes that anymore, right? And I'll keep going back to my secondary readings and saying, okay, no, actually, this is a pretty dominant narrative, not just among non-medievalists, not just among tech bros, which we can talk about how much they love the print revolution, but also among some medievalists.
Yeah. That actually leads me to a question that I had as well, is that when you were talking about your crisis and kind of this revelation with your first book,
Mm.
is about not the importance or medievals not seeing an importance in naming scribes.
Mm.
And then you mentioned kind of tech bros there, and what you were just saying is that this is what's called the transition for everybody listening at home, is that a lot of your work recently has been, in your public facing writing has been about AI
Mm.
or so-called AI, right? And the creation of AI images and kind of what that does, and it's kind of intrusion into that. Because AI like isn't an author, right? Like it's not a person, like, but
Mm.
they're creating images in these ways. How do you see that? I mean, maybe just kind of at a very basic level, like how do you see that kind of connected to some of the work that you're doing,
Mm.
not just kind of scholarly, but like in a classroom? Like what is the value of kind of doing that work and showing how AI images kind of are really problematic in a lot of ways?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I have found is, the expectation among people, particularly because I'm an art historian, that I'm going to have really deep and angry thoughts about
Mm-hmm.
confabulated, confected images. And that doesn't bother me so much in this. I mean, I don't think people should be doing it. It doesn't bother me so much in the sense that it's such a defeatable argument when you get angry about new forms of
Sure.
or any kind of technology. And I'll hear endlessly when I give talks about this stuff. I can tell who in the audience wasn't listening, because they'll be like, well, but photography caused a crisis in art making in the 19th century. So really what concerns me and what I've been writing about now, since even before ChatGPT, before DALL-E, this has been something that's been on the horizon for me for a long time, is more the political and economic project of
Mm.
so-called AI. And so we could talk about the problem of, theft of intellectual property. That's one thing when it comes to AI generated images. But really what concerns me is that they are a threat to civil society.
Mm.
This is by design, that these confabulated images are dismantling any kind of ground for consensus about truth that we have,
Yeah.
so that even when looking at an image that isn't AI generated, someone can say, oh, well, this doesn't confirm my prior, so I'm simply going to float the idea that it might be AI generated.
Yep. Yep.
So that's a far bigger concern for me. And I talk about the economic and the political project of this because, this has been ongoing since, the 1990s. I'm not even thinking about AI here. I'm thinking about arguments regarding stripping away any kind of regulation, or creating regulation in favor of tech companies is more like it,
Yeah.
to allow anything to be said online without any kind of guardrails. At most, there's, regulatory capture, whereas the tech industry gets to decide to
Yep.
regulate themselves. So what does that have to do with print? What I've found is that since the 1990s, print has been used variously. It's changed between the 90s and the early 2000s and then the early 2000s and now. But the print has been used by tech entrepreneurs and financiers and even legislators as a way to provide a historical precedence for what's happening now. Right. So most recently, Sam Altman testified before Congress in 2023 to advocate for effectively allowing him and his industry to decide what's going to regulate them. And he said, well, we're staring down our printing press moment.
Yeah.
And so just as print was being used to make arguments, political arguments in the 15th century, the king is too weak to keep the print of his ship and his face on the coin, so too now print is an idea that is being politicized.
Yeah. And being leveraged, right, in order to advance a particular kind of agenda, in both cases, right, to advance a particular kind of agenda. I'm thinking about the doubt that this sows and how that kind of frays the bonds of civil society. Like, as we're recording this, there was just, I think it was yesterday or today, the official White House account put out an image of a protester that had been arrested, in which they literally changed her face. Like, they changed her face so that she seemed to be weeping. She was not actually weeping. And they just simply said, like, yeah, we changed her face. We don't really care. It's more true in some ways for them, right? But it's not actually true in any way, shape, or form.
And it's a win-win for them, right? Because those who are paying attention to their outlets will only see the image that they choose to disseminate, which promotes whatever arguments they're promoting. And then for everybody else, that will further deteriorate our ability to have some kind of trust in public platforms or platforms for public speech and debate. So again, win-win.
Yeah.
They get what they want. And it sows distrust in any kind of, it sows distrust in government, and it sows distrust in the fourth estate.
Yeah. And like you just said, you don't know what you can believe, right, when you see things anymore. And especially when you have kind of authority figures kind of saying, like, yeah, I don't know, you shouldn't believe anything, right? Then that becomes increasingly problematic. I want to go back to that, something you were saying too about the analogy of the use of AI to the kind of quote unquote print revolution, right, of the 15th, 16th century, which is just so bullshit. Anyway, the other thing too, which I assume kind of goes with it, is that resistance to it gets you accused of being a Luddite.
Yeah.
Right. It was about kind of anti-technology kind of in some way. And, I want to point to, just for our listeners, is that Sonja has a really wonderful essay in Public Books. I can't remember the exact title, but it's about kind of frictions. Is about kind of the frictions that, people who teach especially can put up in the way of these large language models and this kind of AI revolution, which is in no ways kind of rejecting the technology at all. It's just saying, like, well, let's ask some basic questions about it. And you co-wrote that with a colleague, which is also extremely important based upon kind of what we were talking about. But can you just talk a little bit about kind of what led you to that kind of advocacy there? I mean, it seems like kind of an outgrowth of what we've been talking about, but maybe there was something else kind of at play.
Yeah, and I will just give a shout out to my co-author, Christopher Nygren. We've now published 3, possibly 4 pieces together.
Okay, great.
AI. Oh, yeah. So Chris is a wonderful buddy of mine. He is a scholar of Renaissance art, award-winning author of Titian's Icons. So I'll just put in that plug for him.
Yeah.
The reason why I've been writing, let me go back to your first question about the accusations about being a Luddite.
Yeah.
So I find there are 2 ways that I like to answer this question. The first one is I'm not opposed to the or any given technology. I am opposed to the economic and political project of upward wealth transfer that AI is being leveraged to bring about. So, I mean, that right there is one way to say, like, questions of the technology itself feel a little bit beside the point to me.
Yeah.
However, when I do talk about the technology with respect to the historical humanities, I think a lot of this emerges from the technologization of the university.
Yes.
The decision to stop hiring full-time professors and instead outsource the things that we and staff and librarians do to technology platforms. And this has been a very successful argument. Legislators love it because it's tied to things. I work at a state university. I'm speaking about state universities because it's tied to certain ideals that stick to the word innovation. However, when I do want to think about the technology itself, It's quite literally the opposite of innovative when it comes to the humanities, because it relies upon the repetition of the most commonly said things among consensus. It's a large language models. They're statistics. It's linear algebra and statistics, and it gives you the most likely guess that emerges from crunching lots of online text, which of course doesn't comprise the whole corpus of scholarship.
No.
Particularly not the case in art history, where some of the most important venues for our scholarship are edited volumes that are not online, they're not digital.
Yeah.
And that's to do with economics. That's to do with the fact that we need really good images in what we publish. And volumes are a great venue for that. So again, even there, you can see how the technology is radically unsuited to the historical humanities, because what we do as historians of all stripes is add more context, add more granularity. And the second that you submit something to a computer, you have to make it machine readable, which means you have to reduce it to code. You have to reduce it to zeros and ones.
Mm-hmm.
So what image recognition models are doing, which is a form of AI, it's not generative AI, but image recognition models, what they're doing, it's not looking, it's stats, because they don't see.
Mm-hmm.
That's just inherently diametrically opposed to what I, as an art historian, do.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense, is that the reality of the work that we in the humanities do is just different than what an LLM is trying to do. Right. Like, kind of as you were saying, it seems to me too that some of our colleagues in other fields outside of the humanities are bumping up against this problem very suddenly sometimes too, and this goes beyond kind of the problems of LLMs as they kind of exist, right? In that they're hallucinating or making up stuff in order to make things, seem plausible and things like that. But I like how the way that you kind of tied in the importance of context, which has been a running theme in our conversation here, about not just in things in the past, but what is this thing, this object, this technology doing right now? It doesn't have anything to do with the object, because the object is just an object. It doesn't have any will or intentionality or anything like that. But we can talk about, we should be talking about, like, how is it being used? How do people want to use it? And why are they using it in the ways that they are? And as you were saying, in the case of the university, and I work at a public university as well, is that it's not just tied to innovation, it's tied to efficiency, right? Is that it's very explicitly like, well, we don't need people to do these things anymore. And so that's a project, right? If you're saying efficiency, we don't need people, that means that people are going to get fired, that people aren't going to get hired, and you don't want human beings in these roles. And we can ask questions, and we should ask questions, not just in the humanities, about like, well, why? Why are you saying that's a goal?
Right. And this too has a history. There's a book written in the 1960s by Raymond Callahan called Education and the Cult of Efficiency. And he talks about the importation of Taylorism into education beginning in the 19-teens in America.
Yeah.
And of course, in the 19-teens, efficiency might have meant something different from what it means now.
Sure.
I'm not a 20th century historian, but it's not new to our moment. But the pieces on the board are certainly different. And the benefits of calling for efficiencies in education are accruing to different people, so tech oligarchs. And as Chris and I say in a couple of our pieces, we say education itself, it can't be made efficient. It is naturally an inefficient process. It has to be an inefficient process. Friction is where education happens, because if everything were easy and smooth, you wouldn't be learning.
Yeah. If you're just trying to memorize things, then that's one thing, but that's not what an education is. And I think that's what everybody kind of, should be agreeing on. But, whether they do it, that's another question entirely. So with the rapid onset, the problem of educational technology, and just speaking about kind of higher education generally, has been, as you were saying, kind of a problem, not just since the 60s, but, rapidly increasing. Like, I'm old enough to remember MOOCs, the massive online courses and stuff like that, how that was going to take over. And then, everything else, like the online learning management systems, like Blackboard, Canvas, like that was going to revolutionize things. And like, none of these things have happened yet. Maybe ChatGPT is going to be the thing that kind of changes everything. But it's a reason for hope, within this, do you think? Like, is there enough friction or enough desire for friction, do you think, to push back against not the technology itself, but the ways that it's being leveraged to really kind of attack the project of higher education in a lot of ways?
Yeah, if I didn't have reasons for hope, I don't think I'd be able to go on.
Fair
And
enough. Yeah,
and the hope that I get comes from moments with my students. I had a student last semester who really was so engaged with the class, was eating it up, loving it, but the writing and ability to express the great ideas that they were able to convey to me verbally was, not quite there yet.
sure.
And they went repeatedly to my office hours over the semester. We worked through their ideas together and they knocked it out of the park by their final paper. And it was that dialogue with someone who was struggling but wanted to improve their capacity to be able
Yeah.
to look at a work of art, to dissect it, and then to articulate an argument about it that gives me a lot of hope. So that's one place where I feel it. And, another place is, at the risk of sounding a little arrogant, or maybe arrogant's not the right word, but the support I get from colleagues who say thank you when,
Hmm.
I publish something about resisting the incursion of AI into the university, or when Chris and I publish something about that. That gives me hope because it suggests that there are a lot of people who feel the same way. And yeah.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the incredible importance and value. And there's lots of downsides to this too, but of doing work like this in the public sphere is other people who aren't doing that work or might feel alienated in their own space, knowing that there are other people like them out there and finding solidarity in those ways and giving them ability to kind of share an article with some colleagues who maybe haven't seen it. And then they'll be, oh yeah, no, that's, and start conversations kind of locally. And the importance of our students too is I've had very similar experiences, is that there are plenty of students, in my own teaching who I'm sure are using these types of things who don't necessarily care. I mean, that's always the problem. But the students, by and large, want to be in the classroom.
Mm.
They want that kind of experience. And like, I wouldn't trade that for anything. They're the ones who, like you said, like they want to come to office hours. They want to stay after. They want to ask another question. They want to read the text. They want to have somebody pay attention to them because their life is flooded with people telling them that their voices don't matter and they don't care and that there are machines that are just going to do these things. And that human connection of a classroom is just irreplaceable in a lot of ways.
It's irreplaceable, and I see what we're doing as, in part, giving people the tools with which to continue having a fruitful intellectual life once they leave college, the campus.
Yep.
Because I'm not, very few of my students go on to graduate school or, go on to get PhDs
Yeah.
or become academics. But I would also say one other group of people who have really given me a lot of hope. Over the last year, I've been going around giving a lot of talks against AI and its incursion into the university. And almost 100% of those talks, I have had computer scientists and engineers come up to me afterwards and say, I feel the same way. Thank you.
Mhm.
Because what we're talking about here is, again, it's an industry. And what they're doing is a different can of worms. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
And they're feeling hard done by as well. So that's been really cool.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. Like once those things get out into the world, how many people kind of crawl out of the wood. Crawl the woodwork's not the right phrase, right? Because, but just kind of emerge from the forest, Robin Hood-esque, ready to rise up. So, well, maybe on that happy note, we are unfortunately kind of running low on time. So we'll kind of call it there. But if people do want to learn more about you or your work, and they have this thing called the internet, where might they be able to find more about you or your work?
You can find me at my faculty page at umass.edu in the art history department, or you can find me on Blue Sky at Sonja Drimmer. And fortunately, maybe, or not fortunately, I am the only me on the internet, Sonja with a J. So all you have to do is use whichever search engine you want. And if it hasn't been flooded by terrible slop by now, you should be able to find me. But Blue Sky would be the best.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sonja, for joining us. This has been a really wonderful and amazing conversation. I hope that our listeners will go out and learn more and look up your articles and read more about them and all the incredible ways that print was used in the Middle Ages, and also why you should resist AI in education. So anyway, thank you everyone for joining us for another episode of American Medieval. Until then, be good or don't. I'm not your mom. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of American Medieval, proud member of the Multitude Podcast Collective. I'm your host, Professor Matthew Gabriel, and this episode was edited by Julia Schiffini. The theme song to American Medieval is from the song Sleeping Bags by OTE. If you'd like to support the show, get ad-free episodes, be inscribed into the Book of Life for being a kind and generous soul, and get some other neat bonus stuff, please visit us at patreon.com/American Medieval. Thanks again for listening. See you all soon.